She'd swiped left so many times she'd lost count. Her thumb ached from it. Dating apps had stopped feeling like a doorway to love and started feeling like a chore, like sorting laundry or paying bills. Every profile seemed to blur into the next. Gym selfies with duck lips, vague quotes about vibes and energy, and bios that said things like, fluent in sarcasm, or just ask. As if that actually told you anything. She'd gone on 3 dates in the last 6 months. One guy spent the whole time talking about his crypto portfolio. Another showed up 40 minutes late and blamed traffic, while wearing flip-flops to a nice Italian place. The third one asked halfway through dessert if she'd ever consider being a sugar baby. She wasn't looking for a fairy tale. She didn't need a prince on a white horse. She just wanted someone real. Someone who didn't perform kindness like it was a role in a play. Someone who listened more than they talked. Someone who didn't treat a first date like a job interview for the position of girlfriend. But real felt rare these days. Her best friend had been on her case for weeks. "You're hiding," she'd said one evening over video call, stirring a mug of tea with one hand while holding her toddler on her hip with the other. "You're not giving anyone a chance." "I'm giving them chances," she'd replied, flopping onto her couch. "They're just not worth it." "But what if the right person isn't on an app?" her friend pressed. "What if they're the kind of guy who doesn't even have a profile? Who doesn't post selfies or check in at brunch spots?" She'd snorted. "You mean like a ghost?" "No, like a human," her friend said gently. "My cousin's book club has this guy. He's quiet, reads a lot, volunteers at a community garden, doesn't own a smartphone, just a basic flip phone for calls. He's different." That actually made her pause. No smartphone? In 2024? Either he was a conspiracy theorist living off-grid, or he was genuinely uninterested in the performance of modern life. She leaned toward the latter mostly because her friend wasn't the type to set her up with a weirdo. "Fine," she sighed. "One date. But if he shows up wearing socks with sandals or starts quoting Ayn Rand, I'm leaving." Her friend laughed. "He's meeting you at Benny's Diner, 7 o'clock. And don't judge him by his clothes, he's not flashy." "Flashing what?" she teased. "His wallet?" "No," her friend said seriously. "He doesn't even carry one. Keeps cash in his pocket." That stuck with her. No wallet, no phone, no social media. It sounded almost inconvenient, but also strangely peaceful, like he'd opted out of the noise. The night of the date, she almost bailed. Rain had started falling in the late afternoon, turning the sidewalk slick and the air heavy with that wet concrete smell. She stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes trying to decide what to wear. Not too dressed up, this was a diner, not a gala, but not so casual she looked like she didn't care. She settled on dark jeans, a soft sweater, and her favorite boots. No makeup except a swipe of mascara. She wanted to look like herself, not a version she thought someone else would like. Benny's Diner was exactly what you'd expect. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, a counter with spinning stools, and the constant sizzle of something frying in the kitchen. The jukebox in the corner played an old Motown tune, Marvin Gaye maybe, and the air smelled like coffee, bacon, and warm pie. It was the kind of place where people came to eat, not to be seen. She spotted him right away. He was sitting in a booth by the window, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, staring out at the rain like he was watching a movie only he could see. He wasn't scrolling on a phone. He wasn't fidgeting, he just sat, calm, present. He looked nothing like the men she usually dated. His hair was a little messy, like he'd run his hands through it a few too many times. His beard was trimmed but not perfect. More I did this myself with kitchen scissors than I have a barber on speed dial. His flannel shirt was faded, with a small tear near the elbow, and his boots were scuffed at the toes. No watch, no rings, no cologne she could smell from across the room. Just a man in worn clothes, waiting. When he saw her, he stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his water glass. He caught it just in time, cheeks flushing slightly. "Hey," he said, voice low and steady. "You must be." "Her," she smiled. "And you must be the mystery man from the book club." He let out a quiet laugh. "Guilty? Sorry, I'm not great at this." "Neither am I," she admitted, sliding into the booth across from him. A waitress came by, refilled his coffee, and took her order. Black coffee with a splash of oat milk. He raised an eyebrow. "Oat milk? That's fancy. Not really, she said. I just don't like how dairy sits in my stomach. He nodded like that made perfect sense. I get that. My body's weird about mushrooms. One bite and I'm out for the count. They both laughed, and just like that, the tension melted. They didn't talk about jobs right away. Didn't ask where each other lived or what cars they drove. Instead, he asked what kind of books she liked. I don't read much fiction anymore, she said. Too much drama. I like graphic novels, especially ones about real people. There's this one about a woman who rebuilt her life after losing everything in a fire. It wrecked me. His eyes lit up. I love those. Stories about regular people doing hard things. Not superheroes, just humans. She felt a little jolt in her chest. No one had ever called her taste human before. When she asked about his book club, he explained they mostly read nonfiction. Books about soil health, urban farming, climate resilience. We're trying to turn an abandoned lot downtown into a food forest, he said. Fruit trees, berry bushes, herbs. Stuff people can actually use. You're doing that yourself? With a few others, yeah. Mostly on weekends. It's slow work, but it feels good. She believed him. There was dirt under his fingernails, real, honest dirt. Not the kind you get from typing on a keyboard. Their food came. She'd ordered pancakes with extra syrup. He'd gone for the meatloaf special with mashed potatoes. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and then he looked up. So, you design things for a living? She nodded. Posters, logos, websites, whatever pays the bills. Do you like it? Most days, she said. Especially when I get to work with small businesses, like that animal shelter downtown. I did their adoption posters last month. He leaned forward, interested. Can I see one? She pulled out her phone, opened her portfolio, and showed him the poster. It featured a scrappy little terrier with one ear up and a hopeful look in its eyes. That's him, she said softly. I fostered him for 3 weeks. Named him Biscuit. He got adopted by a retired teacher who sends me updates. He studied the image for a long moment. You made him look loved, he said finally. Not pitiful, just waiting for his person. She blinked, surprised. Most people just said cute dog. He saw the intention behind her work. They talked for over an hour, about nothing and everything. He told her about the time he tried to grow tomatoes on his fire escape and ended up with one sad, golf ball-sized fruit. She told him about her disastrous attempt at baking sourdough during lockdown. It could have doubled as a doorstop. They bonded over their shared hatred of automatic hand dryers in public restrooms. They sound like angry robots. And how grocery stores always play the worst music at 7 a.m. When the check came, he reached for it without fanfare, but then paused. Mind if we split it? He asked. I don't have much on me, but I can cover half. She didn't hesitate. Yeah, of course, it wasn't about the money. It was about the honesty. No grand gesture, no let me impress you energy. Just two people sharing a meal, paying their share. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. He walked her to her car, not to make a move, not to linger for a kiss, just because it felt like the decent thing to do. So, he said, shoving his hands in his pockets. Was this okay? More than okay, she said, and meant it. I had a really good time. He smiled. A real one, warm and a little shy, like he hadn't practiced it in a mirror. Me too. They exchanged numbers. His was scribbled on a napkin. He really didn't have a smartphone. And as she drove home, she caught herself smiling at the rearview mirror. It wasn't because he was rich or successful or even conventionally attractive. It was because, for the first time in a long time, she'd felt seen, not as a dating profile, not as a potential +1, but just as herself, back in her apartment. She texted her best friend. He's not what I expected, but I think I like him. She didn't know it yet, but the man she'd just shared pancakes with owned a company that employed over 2,000 people. He'd been featured on the cover of business magazines. He had a penthouse with views of the entire city skyline. But that night, none of that mattered because none of it was visible. All she saw was a man who listened, who remembered her coffee order, who laughed at her dumb jokes, and who carried his life in his pockets instead of on a screen. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what she needed. They kept seeing each other, not because either of them planned it, but because after that first night at the diner, neither could stop thinking about the other. A few days later, he sent a text. Short, simple, no fluff. There's a farmer's market Saturday morning. Want to walk through it? She said yes before she even finished reading it. Saturday morning was cool and bright, the kind of day that makes you feel like anything's possible. She met him near the entrance where vendors were setting up tables under striped awnings. He was wearing the same kind of clothes, worn jeans, a soft cotton shirt, boots that had clearly seen miles. But he'd brought 2 reusable tote bags and a thermos of coffee. "Thought we might find something good," he said, handing her a cup. "It's black, but I remembered the oat milk thing, so I brought a little carton." She stared at him. "You remembered that?" He shrugged like it was nothing. Seemed important. They wandered through the stalls, past jars of local honey, baskets of just-picked strawberries, handmade soaps that smelled like lavender and rain. He didn't buy much, but when he did, it was thoughtful. A loaf of sourdough from a woman who baked it in her wood-fired oven, a small bunch of fresh herbs for tea. He chatted with the vendors like he knew them, not in a performative way, but like he genuinely cared how their week had been. She noticed how people smiled when they saw him, not because he was flashy, but because he made them feel seen. The elderly man selling apple butter called him kid and slipped an extra jar into his bag. The teenager running the flower stand blushed when he complimented her sunflowers. "You come here often?" she asked. "Every weekend," he said. "It's where I get most of my food. Plus, it feels good to support people who grow things with their own hands." Later, they sat on a bench near the park, sharing the bread and talking about nothing urgent. How city pigeons were smarter than people gave them credit for. Why old movies had better dialogue, whether pineapples belonged on pizza. They agreed absolutely not. Time didn't feel rushed. There was no pressure to impress, no hidden agenda. Just 2 people enjoying a morning together. Over the next few weeks, their dates followed a pattern, but not a boring one. Always simple. Always real. One evening, they met at a used bookstore downtown. He let her pick out whatever she wanted, then surprised her by buying it without asking the price. "You looked like you needed that one," he said, nodding at the graphic novel she'd been holding for 10 minutes. Another time, they walked along the river at sunset, stopping to watch a group of kids feeding ducks. He told her about growing up near water, how his grandfather taught him to skip stones, how he used to fall asleep to the sound of rain on a tin roof. She shared stories too, about her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of ginger and soy sauce, how she learned to draw by copying comic books under the dining table. He never offered to pay for everything. Sometimes he did, sometimes she did, sometimes they split it. Once, when they grabbed tacos from a food truck, he realized he was short a few bucks. Instead of making a big deal, he just said, "Mind if I owe you $5? I'll pay you back next time." And he did, showing up the following week with exact change and a single sunflower from the market. She started looking forward to their time together more than anything else in her week, not because it was glamorous, but because it felt honest. With him, she didn't have to be on. She could be tired, messy, silly, quiet, whatever she was that day. And he met her there every time without judgment. What she didn't know was that this simplicity was a choice, not a necessity. In truth, he lived a double life. By day, he was the quiet man in flannel, tending to community gardens, riding the bus, eating beans from a can. But in another part of the city, in a sleek high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows, a different version of him existed. There he sat in boardrooms, made decisions that affected thousands of employees, signed checks that could buy small islands. He was the CEO of a company that pioneered clean energy solutions, solar panels that worked in cloudy climates, batteries made from recycled materials, water purifiers for remote villages. He hadn't always been like this. Years ago, he'd been just as flashy as anyone. Private jets, designer suits, parties in penthouse suites. But then came the betrayal. A trusted executive, someone he'd treated like family, had embezzled millions, nearly tanking the company. Worse, the man had used their friendship to manipulate investors, leak secrets, and smear his name. The fallout was brutal. Lawsuits, news headlines, sleepless nights. After it all settled, he realized something. Almost everyone in his life had been drawn to his money, his title, his access, not to him. Friends vanished when the scandal hit. Dates suddenly lost interest when he stopped posting luxury photos. Even family members started asking for loans or investment opportunities. He'd had enough, so he stepped back. Not from work. He still ran the company, but quietly through trusted deputies and encrypted calls. He moved out of the penthouse and into a tiny apartment above a laundromat. He sold his sports car and bought a 10-year-old pickup. He traded his smartphone for a flip phone and deleted all social media. He started volunteering at the community garden not for PR, but because dirt under his nails made him feel human again. And then he met her. From the very first night at the diner, he'd been struck by how she looked at him, not at what he might be worth, but at who he was. She didn't flirt to get something. She didn't drop hints about expensive restaurants or vacations. She asked real questions and listened to the answers. For the first time in years, he felt like he could just pay, but living this double life wasn't easy. There were close calls. Once, while they were browsing a thrift store, his encrypted work phone buzzed in his coat pocket, a rare emergency. He stepped outside to take the call, voice low and firm, speaking in terms a CEO would use. When he came back, she asked if everything was okay. "Yeah," he said, rubbing his temple. "Just family stuff. My uncle's having trouble with his business." She accepted it, not because she was naive, but because she trusted him. And that trust weighed on him more than she knew. Another time they were walking past a newsstand, and a magazine cover caught her eye. Viridian Dynamics CEO named Environmental Hero of the Year. The photo showed a sharply dressed man with the same eyes, the same jawline, but styled, polished, unrecognizable. She pointed. "That guy looks kinda like you." He froze for half a second, just long enough for her to notice, then laughed it off. "Nah, that's just good lighting. I wish I had hair that nice." She chuckled and moved on. But later, alone in her apartment, she wondered. Not because she suspected anything, but because the resemblance had been uncanny. Still, she didn't press. She figured if he wanted to tell her something, he would. Meanwhile, he wrestled with guilt. Every time she smiled at him, every time she reached for his hand during a quiet moment, he felt the lie between them grow heavier. He wanted to tell her the truth, but how? "Hey, remember how I said I fix things for a living? Well, technically, I own the company that makes the things I fix." It sounded ridiculous. And worse, it risked ruining what they had, because what they had felt rare. One rainy afternoon, they met at a tiny coffee shop with mismatched chairs and a cat that slept on the counter. They'd been talking for hours and the conversation turned deeper than usual. "Do you ever feel like people only see the version of you they want to see?" she asked, stirring her tea. He looked up, surprised. "All the time. I mean, it's like we wear masks without even knowing it. At work, online, even on dates, we show the part that's safe or impressive or likable, but not the messy part." He was quiet for a long moment. What if someone showed you their messy part, and you still stayed? She met his eyes. Then maybe that's the start of something real. He swallowed hard. The words sat between them, heavy with meaning. That night, as he walked back to his apartment, he made a decision. He couldn't keep living two lives. Not if he wanted this, her, them, whatever this was, to last. He'd tell her soon. Not all at once, maybe, but piece by piece. He owed her that honesty. But life had other plans. Because while he was choosing truth, someone else was hunting for a story. A reporter, tipped off by a disgruntled former employee, had started digging. They'd heard rumors that the reclusive CEO of Viridian Dynamics had vanished from public view, and that he'd been spotted in plain clothes, working odd jobs, living like a regular person. The reporter didn't know why. But they knew a juicy story when they smelled one, and they were getting closer. For now, though, none of that touched them. On a quiet Sunday morning, they met at the community garden he helped run. He showed her how to plant kale seedlings, his hands guiding hers in the soil. She laughed when dirt got on her nose. He wiped it off with his thumb, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just that touch. She didn't know who he really was. He didn't know how much longer he could hide it. But in that garden, with the sun warming their backs and the smell of earth all around, none of it seemed to matter. What mattered was the way he looked at her, like she was the only real thing in a world full of illusions. And for now, that was enough. Rain tapped softly against the window as she stood in the tiny apartment above the laundromat, waiting. He'd invited her over for the first time. Just to hang out, he'd said. Maybe watch an old movie on his small TV. She'd agreed, curious to see the space he called home. It was even smaller than she imagined. One room, really. Bed in the corner, a hot plate on a folding table, a single bookshelf crammed with paperbacks and seed catalogs. The walls were bare except for a hand-drawn map of local parks pinned near the door. It felt lived in, not staged. Humble, but not sad. He'd stepped into the bathroom to wash his hands, leaving her alone for a moment. She didn't snoop, not on pee. Furpose. But as she turned to set her coat on the back of a chair, her elbow brushed against the open top drawer of his nightstand. Something inside caught the light. A watch, not just any watch. Thick, heavy, with a dark leather strap and a face that gleamed like polished steel. She recognized the brand instantly, not because she was into luxury goods, but because a client had once used it in a high-end ad campaign. This wasn't something you bought at a department store. This was the kind of watch that cost more than her car. Her stomach dropped. She stepped back like she'd touched something hot. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe it was fake. But it didn't look fake. It looked real. Too real for a guy who split diner checks and carried cash in his pocket. Before she could process it, he came back in, drying his hands on a towel. He saw her expression, followed her gaze to the drawer, and froze. For a split second, his face changed. Just a flicker of panic, quickly masked by calm. But she saw it. "That's not what you think," he said slowly. "What is it then?" she asked, voice softer than she meant it to be. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was a gift. From someone I used to work with. I keep it because it reminds me of a lesson I needed to learn." She wanted to believe him. She really did. But the story felt thin, like a bandage over a wound that needed stitches. "Okay," she said, forcing a smile. "No big deal." But it was. A few days later, she saw something else. She'd been waiting for him outside the library. They were meeting for coffee, when a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb half a block away. The tinted window rolled down and he stepped out, dressed in his usual flannel and boots. He said something to the driver, then turned and walked toward her, his expression unreadable. But she'd seen it. The car. The way the driver had opened the door for him like it was routine. The quiet efficiency of it all. This wasn't a friend's car. Friends don't drive luxury SUVs with tinted windows just to drop someone off near a library. Her mind raced. Was he in some kind of trouble? Was he involved with someone dangerous? Or was there something else going on? Something he wasn't telling her. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about all the little things that hadn't added up. How he never talked about his past in detail. How he always paid in cash but never seemed to run out. How he knew things. About business, about policy. About global supply chains that didn't fit with someone who just worked with his hands. She didn't want to accuse him. But she needed to know. So the next time they met at a quiet bench in the park, she asked, gently, "Hey, can I ask you something?" He looked up from the sandwich he was unwrapping. "Of course. Are you in some kind of situation? Like, are you hiding from something? Or someone?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "The car the other day. And the watch. It just doesn't match what you've told me." He set his sandwich down. His shoulders tensed, but his voice stayed calm. "I told you the watch was a gift. And the car belongs to a friend who gives me rides sometimes. I help him with some side projects, and he helps me out when I need a lift." It sounded rehearsed. Not like a lie exactly, but like a story he'd prepared. She nodded, but the doubt didn't go away. If anything, it grew. Then came the photo. It happened on a Tuesday. She was scrolling through her feed during a work break when a headline popped up on a gossip site she never visited. But somehow, it was right there in her recommended feed. Billionaire CEO living double life as blue-collar Joe? Her heart stopped. The photo showed a man in a tailored navy suit standing confidently on a stage, accepting an award. His hair was neatly styled, his posture sharp, his expression calm and commanding. But she knew those eyes, that jawline, that slight tilt of the head when he was thinking. It was him. No, impossible. It had to be a coincidence. A look-alike. But then she read the caption. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Viridian Dynamics, vanished from public view 6 months ago. Now sources say he's been spotted living under a fake name, working odd jobs and dating a local designer. Her stomach twisted. They had her in the article. Not by name, but close enough. A freelance artist in her late 20s. They'd pieced it together. And now the whole world could see it. She felt sick. Humiliated. Used. Had everything been a game? Was she just part of some weird social experiment? A rich man playing dress-up to see if a regular girl would fall for him? She blocked his number before she could talk herself out of it. He called from a different line an hour later. She didn't answer. Texted, "Please don't contact me." For 2 days, she didn't leave her apartment except to walk her dog. She ignored her friends' worried calls. She deleted the gossip article from her history, but the image was burned into her mind. Meanwhile, he was unraveling. He'd seen the article too. His assistant had called him in a panic. "They found you," she'd said. And they found her. He'd never felt so helpless. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to make her understand, but she wouldn't talk to him. He showed up at her building once just to stand outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But when she saw him from her window, she closed the blinds. The truth was, he'd planned to tell her. That weekend, he'd decided. He was going to take her to the garden, sit her down, and say everything. But the article had blown it all up before he got the chance. Now the reporters were circling. Cameras appeared outside the laundromat. A drone hovered near his window one morning. His cover was gone. But worse than the exposure was losing her. Because in all his years of wealth and power, he'd never met anyone who made him feel this seen. And now, because of his own fear, he'd thrown it away. On the third day, he did the only thing he could think of. He went to her door, not in disguise, not hiding, but as himself. Not the CEO in a suit, but the man she'd met. Flannel shirt, scuffed boots, no pretense. He didn't bring flowers or grand gestures, just himself, and the truth. When she opened the door after a long pause, he didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, eyes full of regret. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "I should have told you sooner. I was scared you'd walk away if you knew who I really was." She crossed her arms but didn't shut the door. "And now I walked away anyway. I know," he swallowed. "But I need you to understand it wasn't about tricking you. It was about finding out if someone could love me for me, not for what I have." She stared at him. "You lied to me." "Yes," he admitted. "And that was wrong. But everything else, the walks, the talks, the way I feel about you, that was all real. Still is." Just then, a car slowed at the end of the street. A man with a camera stepped out. She saw it too. Her eyes widened. "They're following you." He glanced over his shoulder, jaw tight. "I know." For a long moment, they just stood there, caught between truth and consequence, between hurt and hope. Then quietly she said, "Come inside before they get a photo." He stepped over the threshold, and she closed the door behind him. Outside, the reporter snapped a picture of the closed door. But inside, something quieter was happening. Not forgiveness, not yet. But a chance to talk, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start again. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the noise of the street faded into something distant, muffled like it belonged to another world. Inside, it was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of rain starting again outside. She stood with her back against the door, arms still crossed, not looking at him. He stayed near the entryway, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was trying to take up less space. He didn't speak first. He waited. Because he knew this wasn't about explaining anymore. It was about listening. After a long silence, she finally turned. Her eyes were tired, not angry. That was worse somehow. Anger he could handle. Disappointment was heavier. "So," she said, voice low, "you're that guy. The one on the magazine covers." The CEO, he nodded. "Yeah, and all this time. The garden, the diner, the laundromat apartment. That was all." "What? A vacation from your real life?" "No," he said quickly. "It wasn't a vacation. It was me trying to find my way back to myself." She walked to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of water, and handed him one without meeting his eyes. "Start from the beginning. And don't leave anything out." He took a breath, and for the first time he told the truth, no filters, no excuses. He talked about the company he'd built from a garage idea into something that now powered hospitals in remote villages and cleaned polluted rivers. He spoke about the betrayal, the trusted partner who'd stolen millions, lied to investors, and nearly destroyed everything. How the fallout left him questioning every relationship he'd ever had. Friends disappeared. Family asked for money. Dates suddenly wanted advice on their startups that turned out to be pyramid schemes. "I didn't quit," he said. "I just stepped out of the spotlight. I needed to know if anyone could care about me without the title, the money, the name." "So you pretended to be someone else?" she asked, voice sharp. I didn't pretend, he said gently. I just didn't lead with the part that usually defines me. The man you met, the one who likes old movies and hates automatic hand dryers, that's real. That's always been me. The suit, the boardrooms, that's just a job. She sat down at the small table, fingers tracing the rim of her glass. But you let me believe you were struggling. You acted like you barely had enough to split a diner. Check. I wanted to live simply, he said. Not because I couldn't afford more, but because I needed to remember what matters. And when I met you, I didn't want you to see the CEO. I wanted you to see me. She looked up. You should have told me. I know, he said. I kept waiting for the right time. But the more I cared about you, the more scared I got. What if you walked away the second you knew? What if everything we had felt fake to you after that? It does feel fake, she admitted. Not because of who you are, but because you didn't trust me enough to be honest. He flinched. You're right. Outside, a car door slammed. They both tensed. She peeked through the blinds. 2 reporters stood near the sidewalk, one holding a microphone, the other snapping photos of her building. They're not going away, she said quietly. No, he agreed. They never do. She turned back to him. Do you even have a real name? Or was that fake too? My name's real, he said. Everything about me is real, except the story I told about my work. I just left out the scale of it, she let out a shaky breath. This is a lot. I know. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything pressing down. But something had shifted. The anger was still there, but beneath it was something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or the ghost of what they'd started to build. Later that evening, as the rain softened to a drizzle, she made a decision. You can stay tonight, she said. But not because I've forgiven you. Because I don't want you feeding the circus outside. He nodded. Thank you. He slept on her couch, wrapped in an old quilt. She lay awake in her bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the city, and the even quieter sound of someone trying not to breathe too loudly, so as not to disturb her. The next morning, the news exploded, headlines everywhere. Secret millionaire exposed. CEO's double life rocks local community. Tabloids dug up old photos, interviewed former employees, even tracked down the diner waitress who served them on their first date. He was real polite, she told a reporter. Always left a good tip, even when he paid in quarters. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, distant relatives, even old co-workers reached out. Some concerned, others just nosy. One message stood out. A note from her best friend that simply said, I had no idea. But I know you. And I know he's not a monster. Talk to him. Meanwhile, he disappeared from public view again, not to hide, but to act. He called a press conference. Not the usual polished corporate affair, but a raw, unscripted statement filmed in the community garden where they'd once planted kale together. He stood in his work boots, sleeves rolled up, dirt still under his nails. I made a mistake, he began, voice steady. I lied by omission. I let someone I care about believe a version of my life that wasn't complete. That wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't honest. He didn't blame the media, didn't play the victim. He took full responsibility. I stepped away from the spotlight because I'd lost trust in others and in myself. But hiding wasn't the answer, truth is. And the truth is, I'm still the same person who volunteers here, who believes in small acts of kindness, who fell for someone not because of what she could give me, but because of who she is. He ended by announcing he'd be taking a temporary leave from his CEO role, not to escape, but to rebuild trust within his company and with the public. He named a trusted colleague to lead in his absence. And then he walked away from the cameras without a single follow-up question. The internet buzzed. Some called him a fraud, others praised his honesty. But the people who mattered, the garden volunteers, the farmers market vendors, the neighbors in his laundromat building, just nodded. That's him, one said on local news. Always was. She watched the video 3 times. Each time her chest felt a little less tight. A few days later, she went to the garden. She found him kneeling in the soil, pruning tomato vines. He looked up when she approached, eyes wide with surprise and hope. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there watching him work. Then she knelt beside him, picked up a spare pair of gloves from the bucket and started weeding a nearby row. He didn't ask if she'd forgiven him. Didn't ask what this meant. He just handed her a trowel and said, "The basil over there needs thinning." They worked in silence for a while. The sun warmed their backs. Bees buzzed in the lavender. It felt like before, like the world hadn't cracked open and spilled secrets everywhere. Finally, she spoke. Why this place? Why the garden? He paused, wiping his brow with his sleeve. Because here nothing's fake. Seeds either grow or they don't. You can't bribe a tomato to ripen. You can't lie to the soil. It just is, she nodded. I get that. He looked at her then, really looked. I don't expect you to trust me right away. But I'm not going back to hiding. Whatever happens now, it'll be real. She studied his face, the same one she'd fallen for in a diner booth, the same one splashed across magazines. It was all the same man. She'd just been seeing him through different lenses. I don't care about your bank account, she said quietly. I care that you lied, but I also care that you showed up. That you owned it. That you're still here in the dirt doing the work. He smiled, a small, tired, honest smile. I'm not going anywhere. Later, as they walked back toward the street, a reporter approached, camera in hand. Can we get a comment? Are you two together? She didn't answer. But he stepped slightly in front of her, not to block her, but to shield her from the lens. We're figuring it out, he said calmly. Like real people do. The reporter frowned, unsatisfied. But they kept walking. That night, she didn't invite him in. But she didn't shut the door either. They sat on her front steps, sharing a paper bag of warm pastries from the bakery down the street. The same one they'd visited weeks ago, when everything felt simple. I'm scared, she admitted, staring at the stars. Not of you, but of getting hurt again. I am too, he said. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. She looked at him then, not as a CEO, not as a mystery, not as a headline, but as the man who remembered how she took her coffee, who laughed at her dumb jokes, who showed up with sunflowers and split checks and quiet kindness. Maybe that was enough to start over, not with secrets. Not with disguises, just two people choosing to be real, together. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The reporters stopped lurking outside her building. Life didn't go back to exactly how it was before, but maybe that was okay. Some things weren't meant to be undone. She took her time, not because she was punishing him, but because trust isn't rebuilt in a day. It's like planting a tree. You water it, you protect it, you wait. And you don't rush the roots. She watched him closely, not with suspicion, but with quiet attention. She noticed how he still showed up at the community garden every Saturday morning, even after the press conference. How he knelt in the dirt like it grounded him, literally. How he never once mentioned his company unless someone asked. And even then, he'd shrug and say, I'm just helping out where I can. She saw how he treated people, cashiers, bus drivers, kids playing in the park. No difference. No performance. Just kindness, steady and unforced. One afternoon, she visited the garden on her own. She found him teaching a group of neighborhood kids how to plant beans in recycled containers. He wasn't lecturing. He was laughing, showing them how to press the seed into the soil just right, how to water without flooding the roots. One little girl, maybe 6 years old, tugged his sleeve and asked if the beans would talk like in her storybook. He didn't laugh at her. He crouched down and said, not out loud, but if you listen with your heart, you'll hear them growing. She stood at the edge of the plot, unseen, and felt something loosen in her chest. That evening, she texted him for the first time in days. Can we talk? They met at the same diner where it all began. Benny's was quiet on a Tuesday night. The jukebox played softly. The waitress remembered them, smiled when she saw them walk in together. He didn't sit across from her this time. He waited until she chose a side, then slid in beside her, not opposite. A small thing, but it said everything. I'm not here to debate. I'm here to be with you. She stirred her coffee, black with oat milk, and took a breath. I've been thinking, she said. About us. About what you said, about wanting someone to love you for who you are, not what you have. He nodded, quiet. Well, I do, she said. I loved the man in the flannel shirt. The one who remembered my coffee order and laughed at my dumb jokes. And that man is still here. The money, the title, that's just extra noise. He looked at her, eyes wide. You're saying... I'm saying I'm willing to try again, she interrupted gently. But only if we start fresh. No secrets. No hiding, just us. Relief washed over his face, but he didn't smile right away. He knew this wasn't a victory, it was a chance. I'll do whatever it takes, he said. No more half-truths, No more pretending. She reached across the table and took his hand. His palm was rough from work, warm from the mug he'd been holding. It felt real. Good, she said. Because I have an idea. A few days later, they stood in front of the city council presenting a proposal they'd worked on together. It wasn't about billion-dollar deals or global markets. It was about a single empty lot on the east side of town, overgrown, forgotten, full of broken bottles and old tires. Their plan? Turn it into a neighborhood food forest. She'd designed the layout, fruit trees in concentric circles, berry bushes along the fence, raised beds for vegetables, a small seating area with benches made from reclaimed wood. He'd secured the initial funding, not from his company but from a local sustainability grant he'd quietly helped shape years ago. He insisted the money come through official channels. No favors, no name-dropping. At the meeting, she spoke first about community, about food access, about giving kids a place to learn where their food comes from. He spoke second, about soil health, water conservation, and how urban green spaces reduce crime and improve mental health. They didn't mention their past, didn't play up the secret millionaire angle. They just presented a solid, thoughtful plan, born from shared values, not headlines. The council approved it on the spot. Construction started the following month. They worked side by side, digging, planting, building compost bins. Neighbors joined in. Kids came after school to water the seedlings. An elderly woman from down the street brought homemade lemonade every Saturday. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and pink, they sat on the edge of the newly planted apple tree circle, sharing a thermos of tea. You know, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I used to think love was about grand gestures, private jets, fancy dinners, perfect Instagram moments. He chuckled. And now? Now I think it's about showing up. In the rain. In the dirt. When no one's watching. He wrapped an arm around her. I'm glad you gave me a second chance. I'm glad you earned it, she said. They didn't move to a penthouse. He kept his apartment above the laundromat for a while longer. Not because he had to, but because it reminded him of what mattered. She kept her place too. They didn't rush into merging lives. They let things grow slowly, like the beans in the recycled pots. Sometimes paparazzi still tried to snap photos. Once a gossip blog claimed they were engaged because they'd been seen holding hands at the hardware store. She laughed when she saw it. He called the editor and politely asked them to stop publishing rumors. To everyone's surprise, they did. He never returned to the CEO role full-time. Instead, he shifted into an advisory position, focusing on long-term sustainability projects and mentoring young entrepreneurs from underserved communities. He still wore flannel, still rode the bus sometimes, still carried cash in his pocket, and she kept designing. Posters for local shelters, logos for small farms, murals for schools. Her work got noticed not because of who she was dating, but because it was good. Honest. Human. One morning, months later, they met at Benny's again. Same booth, same coffee orders. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. He opened it. It was a sketch, a rendering of the food forest in 5 years. Mature trees heavy with fruit. Kids climbing low branches, neighbors sharing meals under string lights. In the corner, she'd drawn 2 small figures sitting on a bench, hands clasped, looking out at the garden they'd built together. He looked up, eyes glistening. You really see this? I see us, she said. Not as a millionaire and a designer. Just partners in all of it. He reached into his pocket. Not for cash, but for a small, smooth stone he'd picked up at the garden that morning. He pressed it into her hand. My grandfather gave me one like this when I was 10, he said. Said it was a truth stone. As long as you carry it, you can't lie to yourself or to the people you love. She closed her fingers around it. Cool. Solid. Real. Outside, the city buzzed. Cars honking, people rushing, life moving fast. But inside the diner, time slowed. They didn't need a mansion. Didn't need fame or fortune or flawless fairy tales. They had dirt under their nails, calluses on their hands, and a future they were building together, one honest day at a time. And as they walked out into the morning light, shoulders brushing, no cameras, no scripts, no masks, just 2 people choosing each other, again and again, that was more than enough.